Great. Well, welcome everyone to our book group on the Rule of St Benedict. Tonight we're looking at chapters 48 through to 62, 48 through to 62. And I've entitled this The Rhythm of Daily Life. And so it's interesting that this section is feels like a bit of a mishmash of different sort of bits and pieces, but actually there is a bit of a structure to it, and we're going to look at that tonight. So we move in these chapters from daily discipline, which is all about work and silence and order, then into community relationships, which is about the guests and the sick and the young, and finally into the question of spiritual hierarchy and responsibility, and that's looking at the area of priests, deacons, the deans, and also priests of the monastery. So together, I think if hold them all together in your mind, we really see how Benedict manages to balance the kind of organization of the monastery with this sort of humility, spiritual humility, and the ethos and the scriptural ideals and teaching that lies at the heart. And he manages to hold all of that and place it within a very kind of ordinary organizational world, which of course is the reality which we all live in. So what I'm going to do in this little introduction is kind of break down this whole section into smaller sort of groups of chapters, which sort of hold a little bit together. But of course, you can discuss that in your breakout rooms to see if you agree with me or not. So I'm going to work through each of these sections, and there are five. There are five in total. So the first one is section 48 to 50, those chapters 48 to 50. And they are all about work, silence, and obedience. So Benedict insists that his monks must work. It's a basic premise for him. They're not hermits who are going to scratch out their daily fare from the desert, living on, honey and locusts and all that. Neither are they going to be gyrovagues, those wandering monks who demonstrate their dependence on God by begging. But Benedict's monks are to be what's known as cenobites. And do you remember right at the beginning of he actually highlights these different sort of ways of living the monastic life. So they are to be cenobites, which is community people. And as you know, with community people, we therefore have responsibilities. We have a family to support. It may not be our own children, but it's certainly the people who are around us. They are, the inexperienced young, and also the elderly, people with different gifts, and also, all the kind of human attributes that can be brought into this sort of world and how we work alongside each other. So that's the world in which Benedict places his monks. And so I guess, in a sense, they are exactly the same as us, trying to balance out this need for work alongside a desire to pray. Benedict has some really good ideas of how to do that. So he structures his day, and he structures his week, and he structures his month all along the seasons, the natural rhythms of nature, but also of the liturgical seasons. And he has a very clear structure to it all, so that there is no idleness. Doesn't want anyone lounging around or being bored. So he gives a very clear structure. Lent for Benedict, as you'll have seen from these chapters, a really precious time. It's an opportunity to kind of review that balance in life, maybe shifting it a little bit so that it is a time of growth and a time of prayer. It's a time, Benedict sees it as, for trimming the soul and sort of scraping off all the sludge that life turns, that gets accumulated, the bad habits and all that. I guess a lovely metaphor would be seen, it's a bit like pruning back the roses so that they flower more abundantly and are more healthy. So that's what's precious for Benedict at this period. And of course, it's really nice, I think, that we're reading this chapter and these bits on Lent just before we're about to enter into Lent. So it may be something that you want to talk about in your rooms about, how are you going to use this Lent to follow the kind of spirit of Benedict in that kind of pruning back. We often say that's what Lent is about, but what is it special about Benedict that we can learn about how to use Lent for that self-growth and for prayer? The role of the abbot or the prioress is really kind of crucial in the spiritual life of the monks. They're not just there as an authority figure, sort of running things. They're not just the leaders, but they are also the spiritual mentors, the ones that are going to evaluate what the individuals are doing spiritually and help them to guide them into actually away from the fads and the excesses that they might want to do in Lent, and how can they use this period actually to grow. So it's bringing real wisdom from the leaders of the monastery. And I guess we all need wise counselors, don't we, to help us just reflect on some of the things that we do, and when we get it right and when we get it wrong, and to just say, oh, you might want to think about doing that. So even when they're absent, even when the monk is absent from the monastery, they're still expected to be spiritually connected to the community. And the best way to be spiritually connected is through continuing that life of prayer, but in a different place. And also by keeping the vows, being obedient to the vows of the community, so that even when you're on your own, you are still connected with the heartbeat of the community. So what we see in this little section, these chapters from 48 to 50, is Benedict really trying to set out the work-life balance that we often talk about. What's your work-life balance like? But in a sense, it's not like they're seen as opposite. Here's your work and then there's your life, and we've got to work and now I can enjoy myself. For Benedict, these two are absolutely inseparable. They really are a balance that need each other, and so that's really, really important for Benedict. And I think we can really learn a lot from Benedict in that sense, so that we can live an integrated life rather than now we're at work, now we're at play, sort of thing. So the next group of chapters that you can kind of group together are chapters 51 to 53. And these are all about travel, guests, and hospitality. For Benedict, the monastery is to be enclosed, but that does not mean that it's closed. I'll say that again. The monastery is to be enclosed, but that doesn't mean that it's to be closed, to be shut off. It allows for monks to go out, and it also allows for guests to come in. So that actually the walls of the monastery are quite porous like that. They're quite porous. And I think that's really important to remember because, as you know, we often grow by inviting the other. The other changes us. And so guests are important for the community to actually help them know who they are, but also to grow as a group of people by encountering the other. And also monks who need to go on a journey, they're not sort of, we're not in a prison here. If you need to go, then you need to go on the journey, you need to go to this place. And I think that's also very vital because when we go to different places, we have different experiences. And once again, it's bringing richness and experience back to the community. And of course, one of the most sacred things about the community is how you welcome the stranger, how you welcome the guest. And I don't really need to say this, but, Benedictine hospitality is a crucial sort of bedrock in how monasteries function, but how they also saw themselves. And we have this beautiful line from Benedict, that they are to welcome guests as if they were Christ, with humility, with prayer, and with generosity. But the heartbeat, the center, the still point in this turning world is to be the oratory, the place of prayer, the central core, in fact, that allows management, people moving in and out. It's that place where they come together to actually pray together that absolutely is seen as that central bedrock, holds the community together. So that the community is not exclusive, but it is inclusive and it is actually accessible. It's shared with the stranger. But you can only do that if you have a really good self-identity as a community and you know absolutely where you are anchored and rooted. And for Benedict, that's the oratory and the reverence in prayer. I think that's really a helpful understanding of the monastic life as well, because I think after all the years and years and years of different ways in which people have lived out the monastic life and how it developed and grew, to go back to Benedict's rule and what his vision for a community was, is actually much more akin to how we can live our lives today and how we live in community. There's a lot, obviously, that isn't transferable, but there is quite a bit that is. And I think that can be very helpful for us and how we live together. So the next section, the third section that we lumped together, are chapters 54 to 57. And these are all about possessions, craftsmen, and the material life. So all of us need material goods in our lives. We need clothing, we need footwear, we need utensils. But in Benedict's monastery, these are to be very simple, they're to be sincere, they're not to be about accumulation or about vanity, they are to be very utilitarian in nature. You have what you need, not necessarily what you want. And I think that's one of the hallmarks of the Benedictine life. Those who are creative and are skilled, they, of course, are naturally honored and respected, and they're not prevented from doing their craft. And that craft is used to the benefit of the community. And of course, any leader of a business will know that's great. We've got this fantastic silversmith who's come into the community. We can actually make it a bit of money out of that. So, he's very practical about how the skills of the craftsmen and women can be used to bring in revenue. But he is also aware that it's that you need to have that person or the craftsman or whoever it is to have a real self-awareness so that they don't get pulled down the road of vanity or thinking themselves special or getting puffed up, so that all the people in the monastery, there's a real equity amongst them, an autonomy amongst them. They all have their own gifts and they come together. There's not one that's necessarily better than the other. So he's really, he also, in his kind of management and understanding of trade and everything, is very rooted in the principles of honesty and fairness. If you are going to go into business like that, then you have to do it well, with honesty and fairness. So lots of room in the Benedict's rule for actually enabling the monastery to thrive as a spiritual community, as a pastoral place of hospitality, but also in a practical business-like manner that can actually be sustainable financially and also, in its buildings and how all those things are needed. Then they're not separate from Benedict. It's not a kind of lovely sort of spiritual world up here. He's very aware that actually you've got to clear the gutter, you've got to pay. You got to pay for the food, as well as grow it yourself. There are, he's very aware of that, which I think is really helpful, particularly for folk like myself who have to run massive cathedrals that just soak up money all over the place. And then we go on to the next section, which are chapters 58 to 60. 58 to 60. And these look at formation, at children, and at priests. So Benedict wants his community to be based on commitment and a really deep self-reflection. It's not a whim to go into one of his communities. It's not a fad. It actually comes out of deep searching and reflection and wanting to be part of that community. Therefore, entry into the community for Benedict, it requires a long period of testing to ensure that there is sincerity and perseverance, and also commitment and longevity. Just to finish my little bit of a talk, was that the final section of this all these chapters together are chapters 61 to 62, which is all about leadership and teaching. Authority does exist within the monastery, but this is all shaped by the rule rather than by individuals. So monks carry different roles which have authority to them, but that authority comes only as a result of the rule and in relation to the rule. And I think that's a really interesting thought to take away with you, that authority is about what you're invested with by the rule and by the community. The only exemption to this, of course, is if you are carrying out a sacramental duty, a sacred duty. Otherwise, everyone is ordered and ranked the same. There is no social status. There is only your status from how long you have actually been in the community, how long you've actually been living and committed to the rule, and also how well you follow the rule, So in this section, these chapters from 48 through to 62, Benedict is at his most pastoral and also his most realistic. He anticipates human weakness. So he anticipates pride, laziness, and ambition. And he counters it not with harsh punishments, but actually with routine, with humility, and with shared responsibility. So that the monastery emerges not as a place to escape from the world, to escape from society, but as a carefully ordered school of charity that actually enters more deeply into life and how we can live together well.